The sound of a solitary gunshot echoed through the rolling hills of Roswell, New Mexico territory, but Lily Quinn didn't flinch. Nothing much startled her anymore, not since that terrible day 3 years ago when her mother had been lowered into the hard desert ground. Standing on the weathered porch of the Double Q ranch house, her eyes fixed on the distant horizon, the 17-year-old daughter of the most respected rancher in Lincoln County barely acknowledged the shooting practice happening in the South pasture. The year was 1878, and the territory was changing. The Lincoln County War had just ended, bringing an uneasy peace to the region. But for Lily, peace seemed a foreign concept. Her world had narrowed to the boundaries of her father's ranch, her days filled with chores and silence. Patrick Quinn worried about his daughter. Once a bright-eyed, laughing child who'd race across the ranch on her pinto pony, Lily had grown into a solemn young woman whose smile had become as rare as rain in August. "Lily," Patrick called from the corral where he was breaking a new Mustang. "Would you fetch me some water, please?" Lily nodded mutely and disappeared into the house. At 42, Patrick Quinn was still a striking figure, tall and broad-shouldered, with streaks of silver beginning to thread through his dark hair. The years since his wife Sarah's death had etched deep lines around his eyes, but they hadn't diminished his determination to maintain the ranch they'd built together. When Lily returned with the water, Patrick studied his daughter's face. Her features had matured into those of a beautiful young woman, with her mother's high cheekbones and his own deep blue eyes. But those eyes remained distant, as if part of her had gone into the ground with her mother. "Mr. Franklin rode in this morning," Patrick said, taking the ladle and drinking deeply. "Says the new schoolteacher's arriving on tomorrow's stage. Thought you might like to ride into town with me to greet her." "I have mending to do," Lily replied flatly, already turning back toward the house. Patrick sighed, watching her retreat. He'd tried everything: new books from back east, a beautiful new saddle for her 18th birthday next month, even suggesting a trip to Santa Fe. Nothing seemed to penetrate the wall his daughter had built around herself. The next morning, Patrick rode alone into Roswell. The small but growing town was bustling with its usual activity: freight wagons loaded with supplies, cowboys drinking away their wages at the Silver Dollar Saloon, and ladies in their Sunday best, despite it being a Wednesday. He tethered his horse outside the general store and nodded to familiar faces as he made his way to the stage-coach station. The coach was late, as usual. Patrick waited patiently, exchanging pleasantries with Sheriff Tom Wilkins and listening to the latest territorial news. When the distant rumble of wheels finally announced the stage's arrival, a small crowd had gathered to receive mail or meet arriving passengers. The coach pulled up in a cloud of dust, and the driver jumped down to open the door. First came a traveling salesman, then a mother with 2 small children, and finally, a young woman Patrick judged to be in her early 20s. She wore a sensible traveling dress of deep blue, her honey blonde hair neatly pinned beneath a modest hat. What struck Patrick most, however, was the brightness in her eyes as she gazed around at her new surroundings with undisguised curiosity and delight. "Miss Baker," Sheriff Wilkins stepped forward. "Welcome to Roswell." "Thank you, Sheriff." Her voice carried a slight Eastern accent. "And please call me Julia." "Miss Julia," the sheriff continued, "this here is Patrick Quinn, one of our most respected ranchers. His daughter's about the age of some of the students you'll be teaching." Patrick extended his hand. "Pleasure to meet you, Miss Baker." "We're mighty glad to have a proper teacher in Roswell." Julia Baker's handshake was firm, her smile genuine. "The pleasure is mine, Mr. Quinn. I've been corresponding with the school board for months. I'm eager to meet my students." There was something refreshing about the young woman's enthusiasm. After the obligatory introductions, Patrick offered to help transport her trunks to the small house the town had prepared for the new teacher. "That's very kind of you, Mr. Quinn," Julia said as they loaded her belongings onto his wagon. "I hope I haven't taken you away from important business." "No trouble at all," Patrick assured her. "And please call me Patrick. We're not much for formalities out here." As they rode the short distance to her new home, Patrick found himself telling Julia about the ranch, about the challenges of the territory, and eventually about Lily. "My daughter hasn't had it easy," he confided. "Lost her mother to fever 3 years back. Hasn't been the same since." Julia's expression softened. "I'm very sorry to hear that. Grief can be especially difficult for young people. Will Lily be attending school?" Patrick shook his head. "She's nearly 18, finished with her schooling, but she's a bright girl, always loved reading." He hesitated, then added, "Truth is, Miss Baker, I worry about her. She's got no friends her age, hardly leaves the ranch anymore." "Perhaps she could assist me sometimes," Julia suggested. "I could use help organizing the schoolroom, and it might be good for her to have a purpose beyond ranch chores." Patrick considered this. "That's mighty thoughtful. I can't promise she'll agree, but I'll mention it." By the time they reached the small, whitewashed house at the edge of town, Patrick had decided he liked Julia Baker. There was a practicality about her that reminded him of the frontier women he'd known, yet she carried herself with the refinement of her Eastern upbringing. "Thank you for your help, Patrick," Julia said as they set the last trunk inside. "I hope to meet your daughter soon." Patrick tipped his hat. "You're welcome at the Double Q anytime, Miss Baker." As he rode back to the ranch, Patrick found himself contemplating the new schoolteacher more than he'd expected. At 38, Julia Baker was younger than him, but clearly not a girl fresh from school herself. There was a maturity in her eyes that suggested she'd known her own share of hardships. For the first time in a long while, Patrick felt a stirring of something beyond his grief and curiosity about another person's story. When he arrived home, he found Lily in the kitchen, kneading bread dough with mechanical precision. "The new teacher seems nice," Patrick ventured. "Name's Julia Baker. She's from Boston, came all this way to teach in our little town." Lily merely nodded, continuing her work. "She mentioned needing help setting up the schoolroom. Thought maybe you might be interested." This earned him a brief glance. "I'm busy here." Patrick sighed and decided not to push. "Of course. Just thought I'd mention it." The next few weeks passed in the usual routine. Patrick managed the ranch, dealing with cattle, hands, and the occasional dispute with neighboring properties. Lily kept to herself, performing her chores with quiet efficiency but little enthusiasm. The only new development was Patrick's increasingly frequent trips into town, which he justified with various ranch-related errands. In truth, he found himself seeking out Julia Baker's company. He'd stop by the schoolhouse to fix a loose board or deliver firewood, lingering to hear about her day. Sometimes, they'd share coffee at the small cafe on Main Street, where Julia would tell stories of her students' progress or ask questions about life in the territory. "Why did you leave Boston?" he asked her one afternoon as they sat on a bench outside the general store. "Most folks are trying to get to places like that, not leave them." Julia's smile dimmed slightly. "I needed a fresh start. After my fiancé died in an accident at the shipyard, Boston held too many memories." Patrick nodded, understanding all too well. "Seems we've both been running from ghosts." "Not running," Julia corrected gently. "Learning to live with them. There's a difference." Her words stayed with him as he rode home that evening. The sunset painted the desert landscape in fiery hues, and Patrick found himself wondering if perhaps he'd been doing his daughter a disservice, allowing her to retreat so completely from life. When Sunday came, Patrick made a decision. "Lily, he said over breakfast. "We're going to church today, and afterwards I've invited Miss Baker to join us for dinner." Lily looked up from her plate, surprise and something like betrayal flickering across her face. "Why?" "Because it's time we started living again," Patrick said firmly. "Your mother wouldn't want this for us, this half-life we've been leading." Lily's jaw tightened, but to Patrick's relief, she didn't argue. She silently cleared the table and went to change into her Sunday dress, a simple blue cotton that had grown slightly too small over the past year. In church, Patrick noticed how many of the townspeople greeted Julia with genuine affection. Children especially seemed drawn to her, tugging at her skirts to show her a treasured pebble or whisper a secret. Even the most ornery of Roswell's residents seemed to soften in her presence. Lily observed all this with carefully concealed interest. When Julia joined them afterward, turning that warm smile toward her, Lily managed a stiff nod in response. "It's wonderful to finally meet you, Lily," Julia said. "Your father speaks of you often." "Does he?" Lily replied, a hint of sharpness in her tone as she glanced at her father. The ride back to the ranch was awkward, with Julia valiantly attempting conversation while Lily offered monosyllabic responses. Patrick felt a creeping sense of regret for putting both women in this uncomfortable situation. At the ranch, however, things began to shift subtly. Julia exclaimed with genuine delight over the vegetable garden Lily tended, asking knowledgeable questions about the varieties of beans and squash. When they moved inside, Julia noticed the bookshelf in the corner of the sitting room. "You have Little Women," she exclaimed, running her fingers along the spine. "It's one of my favorites." Something in Lily's expression softened slightly. "Mine, too. Mother gave it to me for my 14th birthday. Which March sister do you relate to most?" Julia asked, settling into a chair as Patrick excused himself to check on dinner. When he returned some time later, he was astonished to find the two still deep in conversation about books. Lily wasn't smiling exactly, but her posture had relaxed, and she was speaking in full sentences for the first time in weeks. Dinner went more smoothly than Patrick had dared hope. Julia seemed to instinctively understand when to engage Lily and when to give her space. By the time dessert was served and apple pie Lily had baked that morning, the tension had eased considerably. As Julia prepared to leave, she turned to Lily. "I'm still organizing books for the school library. If you'd ever like to help, I'd be grateful for someone with your knowledge of literature." Lily hesitated, then nodded. "Maybe. Sometime." It wasn't much, but to Patrick, who had watched his daughter retreat further into herself with each passing month, it felt like a breakthrough. Over the next few weeks, a fragile pattern emerged. Julia would visit the ranch on Sundays after church, sometimes bringing a new book she thought Lily might enjoy. Lily remained reserved but gradually began to engage more, especially when the topic turned to literature or gardening, the two interests she still maintained. Then one afternoon in late September, Lily surprised Patrick by announcing, "I'm riding into town. Miss Baker asked if I could help organize the new books that arrived yesterday." Patrick struggled to keep his voice casual. "That's fine. Take Sunflower, she could use the exercise." He watched from the corral as Lily saddled her Palomino mare, her movements more purposeful than they had been in months. She wore her mother's old riding skirt and had even pinned her dark hair up neatly under her hat. These small signs of care in her appearance gave Patrick more hope than he cared to admit. The schoolhouse sat on the eastern edge of town, a simple one-room building with large windows to catch the desert light. When Lily arrived, she found Julia on a stepladder hanging a map of the United States on the wall. "Oh, Lily," Julia's face brightened. "I'm so glad you came. These books have me completely overwhelmed." Lily eyed the crates of books stacked in the corner. "Where did they all come from?" A benefactor in Santa Fe, Julia explained, climbing down from the ladder. A former teacher who believes every child, regardless of where they live, deserves access to good books. For the next several hours, Lily helped sort and catalog the donations. She worked methodically, occasionally pausing when she discovered a title she particularly loved. Julia noticed these moments and would ask Lily's opinion or sometimes request that she read a passage aloud. "You have a lovely reading voice," Julia commented after Lily had shared a scene from The Count of Monte Cristo. Lily shrugged, but a faint blush colored her cheeks at the praise. "Would you consider coming once a week to read to the younger children?" Julia asked. "Many of them don't have books at home, and hearing stories opens up new worlds for them." Lily's instinct was to refuse, to retreat back to the safety of the ranch and her solitude, but something about Julia's gentle persistence made it difficult to say no. "I'll think about it," she said finally. When Lily returned home that evening, Patrick noticed a subtle difference in his daughter. There was a touch of color in her face, and her eyes seemed more focused, more present than they had been in a long time. "Did you have a good afternoon?" he asked as they sat down to supper. "It was fine," Lily replied, then unexpectedly added, "Miss Baker asked if I would read to the younger children sometimes." Patrick carefully kept his tone neutral. "That sounds like a fine idea. Will you do it?" Lily pushed her food around her plate. "Maybe. The children need to learn about books." It was the longest conversation they'd had in months that didn't involve ranch chores or household matters. Patrick savored it, careful not to push for more. The following Thursday, Lily rode into town again. This time, she found 6 young children waiting eagerly in a circle on a colorful rug at the back of the schoolroom. Julia had selected The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, thinking its mischievous protagonist might appeal to both boys and girls. At first, Lily's reading was stiff, self-conscious. But as the story progressed and she saw the children's rapt expressions, something began to loosen within her. By the time Tom and Becky were lost in the cave, Lily was reading with genuine animation, different voices for different characters emerging naturally as she went. When the hour was up, the children protested loudly. "What happens next, Miss Quinn? Does Tom get eaten by Injun Joe? Are they stuck in the cave forever?" Despite herself, Lily felt the corner of her mouth twitch upward, not quite a smile, but the closest thing to it she'd experienced in years. "You'll have to come back next week to find out," she said. As the children filed out, Julia approached Lily with a cup of tea. "That was wonderful, Lily. You have a real gift." Lily accepted the tea, finding herself unexpectedly touched by the compliment. "They seemed to enjoy it." "They loved it," Julia confirmed. "And so did you, I think." Lily didn't deny it. For a brief hour, she had been transported out of her grief, caught up in the story and the children's reactions. It was the first time in 3 years that she had forgotten, even momentarily, the hollow ache inside her. The reading sessions became a weekly occurrence. Lily found herself looking forward to Thursdays, planning which passages to emphasize and practicing different character voices. The children adored her, often running up to her in town to ask about the next installment of whatever book they were currently exploring. Patrick observed these changes in his daughter with cautious optimism. She was still quiet at home, still prone to long periods of melancholy, but there were moments, brief flashes, when he'd catch her humming to herself while kneading bread or standing on the porch at sunset with a softness in her expression that had been absent for too long. One evening in late October, Patrick returned from town to find Lily sitting on the porch steps, a letter in her hands. "Julia, Miss Baker wrote to me," she explained, seeming almost embarrassed. "About a book she thought I might like." Patrick nodded, careful to keep his expression neutral despite the leap his heart gave at this evidence of a growing friendship. That was thoughtful of her. Lily folded the letter carefully. She's invited me to help with the Harvest Festival preparations. The school is doing a presentation. Do you want to go? Lily was quiet for a long moment. I think Mother would want me to, she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. Patrick swallowed hard against the sudden tightness in his throat. I think she would, too, Sunshine. It was the first time he'd used his old nickname for her since Sarah's death. Lily's eyes widened slightly, but she didn't pull away when Patrick gently squeezed her shoulder before heading inside. The Harvest Festival was the biggest social event in Roswell's calendar. Held in the town square on the first Saturday of November, it featured contests, music, dancing, and enough food to feed the territory. This year, Julia had organized the schoolchildren to perform scenes from American history, with costumes and props they'd created themselves. Lily threw herself into the preparations with unexpected energy, helping younger students memorize their lines and sewing costumes late into the evening. Patrick would find her asleep at the kitchen table, needle still in hand, and carry her to bed as he had when she was small. On the morning of the festival, the Quinn ranch was unusually lively. Patrick had invited Julia to join them for breakfast before they all rode into town together. Watching the two women discuss last-minute festival details, Patrick felt a surge of gratitude toward the schoolteacher who had somehow managed to reach his daughter when no one else could. The town square was already crowded when they arrived. Bunting and paper lanterns decorated every available surface, and long tables groaned under the weight of pies, cakes, and casseroles. The schoolhouse performance was scheduled for noon, and Lily immediately disappeared to help corral excited children into their costumes. She's coming back to life, Patrick said quietly to Julia as they watched Lily kneel to adjust a small boy's Revolutionary War hat. I'd nearly given up hope. Julia's eyes were warm as she turned to him. She was never truly gone, Patrick. Just waiting for the right moment to find her way forward. The children's performance was a triumph. Even the most restless cowboys in the audience were charmed by the earnest young actors portraying the signing of the Declaration of Independence and Washington crossing the Delaware. When the final scene concluded a stirring tableau of pioneers heading west, the applause was thunderous. Afterward, as musicians began setting up for dancing, Patrick found himself scanning the crowd for Lily. He spotted her at the edge of the square, surrounded by her young actors, all talking at once as she smiled down at them with unmistakable pride. Smiled. Patrick felt his breath catch. It wasn't her old carefree grin, but it was genuine, reaching her eyes in a way he hadn't seen since before Sarah's illness. In that moment, Patrick realized that while he'd been focusing on his daughter's healing, something unexpected had been happening within himself as well. The persistent grief that had shadowed him for 3 years had begun to lift, making space for new feelings, particularly toward the schoolteacher now standing beside him. "Would you care to dance, Miss Baker?" he asked impulsively as the band struck up a lively tune. Julia's eyes widened in surprise, but she placed her hand in his with a smile. "I'd be delighted, Mr. Quinn." They joined the other couples forming sets for a Virginia reel. Patrick wasn't much of a dancer, but Julia's easy grace made up for his awkwardness. As they moved through the patterns, Patrick caught sight of Lily watching from the sidelines, her expression a mixture of confusion and something harder to identify. When the dance ended, Patrick thanked Julia and made his way to his daughter. "Everything went wonderfully," he said. "Those children adore you." Lily nodded, her eyes still on Julia, who was now being asked to dance by the town's young blacksmith. "She's dancing a lot," Lily observed neutrally. Patrick followed her gaze. Miss Baker's good company. People enjoy her presence. Including you, Lily said, a question in her voice. Patrick considered deflecting but decided on honesty. Yes, I enjoy her company very much. Lily was quiet for a long moment. Mother would like her, I think, she finally said, then walked away before Patrick could respond. As November deepened toward winter, life at the Double Q settled into a new pattern. Lily continued her Thursday reading sessions at the school and often stayed afterward to help Julia with other tasks. Patrick found himself in town more frequently, ostensibly on ranch business but inevitably ending up at the schoolhouse or inviting Julia for coffee at the cafe. The townspeople noticed, of course. Roswell was too small for anything to go unobserved, particularly the growing friendship between the widowed rancher and the schoolteacher. Most viewed it favorably. Patrick Quinn had been alone too long, they agreed, and Julia Baker was a fine woman who'd brought positive changes to their community. Not everyone was supportive, however. Jasper Thornton, a wealthy cattle buyer who had set his sights on Julia soon after her arrival, made his displeasure known through thinly veiled comments whenever Patrick was present. A schoolteacher needs a man who can provide cultural stimulation, Thornton remarked loudly one afternoon at the general store. Someone who appreciates the finer things, not just cattle and horses. Patrick ignored the barb, but it stung more than he cared to admit. Julia was educated. Refined, perhaps she would indeed prefer someone whose life wasn't centered on the harsh realities of ranch work. His doubts might have festered if not for an unexpected conversation with his daughter. They were riding fence lines together, a rare opportunity for companionship that had become more frequent as Lily emerged from her shell. Miss Baker asked about our Christmas traditions, Lily said as they paused to repair a loose section of wire. Did she? Patrick handed his daughter the pliers. What did you tell her? That we haven't really had any, not since Mother. Lily worked the wire with practiced hands, but I was thinking maybe this year we could do something, a proper dinner, maybe a tree. Patrick studied his daughter's profile, so like her mother's it sometimes hurt to look at her. I think that would be nice. Your mother always loved Christmas. Miss Baker doesn't have any family out here, Lily continued, her tone carefully neutral. Maybe we could invite her to join us. Patrick tried not to show his surprise at this suggestion. That's mighty thoughtful of you, Lily. She shrugged, focusing intently on the fence repair. She shouldn't be alone at Christmas, and I like having her around. This last admission seemed difficult for Lily, as if she feared betraying her mother's memory by growing fond of another woman. I like having her around too, Patrick said gently. Lily finally looked at him directly. I know, Pa, I'm not blind. There was so much Patrick wanted to say in that moment about how loving Julia didn't diminish what he'd had with Sarah, about how healing wasn't betrayal, about how he worried that his feelings might somehow hurt Lily just as she was beginning to find her way back to happiness. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, he simply said, "Let's invite her for Christmas, then." The invitation was delivered the following Sunday when Julia joined them for dinner after church. To Patrick's delight, she accepted immediately, her eyes bright with pleasure. I'd love to help with preparations, she offered. I make a rather famous cranberry sauce, or so my mother always claimed. Lily's in charge of Christmas this year, Patrick said. You'll have to coordinate with her, and coordinate they did. In the weeks leading up to Christmas, Lily and Julia became co-conspirators, exchanging recipes and decoration ideas. They spent evenings by lamplight making paper ornaments and garlands for the small pine tree Patrick and his ranch hands brought in from the hills. The house began to take on a festive air it hadn't seen in years. What touched Patrick most was watching his daughter laugh. It happened first when Julia accidentally spilled flour all over herself while teaching Lily to make her grandmother's special Christmas cookies. Lily's laugh was rusty, almost as if she'd forgotten how, but it was genuine, a bright, clear sound that brought tears to Patrick's eyes. After that, laughter came more easily to her. She would smile at the antics of the ranch dogs, chuckle at stories Julia told about her students, even joke with Patrick in a way that reminded him painfully and wonderfully of the girl she'd been before grief had shadowed her young life. On Christmas Eve, a light snow fell, unusual for Roswell but welcomed as a holiday blessing. The double Q looked like something from a picture book, the whitewashed ranch house outlined against the desert landscape, smoke curling invitingly from the chimney. Inside, the house was warm with the scents of roasting turkey, sage dressing, and Lily's apple pies cooling on the windowsill. A fire crackled in the hearth, and candles glowed on every surface. Patrick had even splurged on real glass ornaments for the tree, ordering them all the way from Santa Fe as a surprise. Julia arrived in the early afternoon, her cheeks flushed from the cold, arms laden with packages wrapped in colorful paper. She'd never looked more beautiful to Patrick, her honey blonde hair dusted with melting snowflakes, her green eyes bright with holiday spirit. "Merry Christmas," she called as Patrick helped her out of her coat. "Oh my, it smells heavenly in here." Lily appeared from the kitchen, wearing her mother's old apron and looking more animated than she had in years. "You're just in time to help with the cranberries," she told Julia, leading her toward the kitchen. Patrick followed, content to watch as the two most important women in his life worked side by side, talking easily about the meal preparations. When had that happened? He wondered. When had Julia Baker become so essential to his happiness, to their happiness? Dinner was a festive affair. Patrick had invited his foreman and two ranch hands who had nowhere else to go, and the table was crowded with good food and better company. Stories and laughter flowed as freely as the apple cider Patrick had mulled with cinnamon and cloves. Afterward, they gathered around the tree to exchange gifts. Lily had carved a beautiful wooden bookmark for Julia, intricately decorated with delicate flowers. "So you can mark your place in all those books you love," she explained shyly. Julia's eyes glistened as she ran her fingers over the smooth wood. "It's exquisite, Lily. Did you make this yourself?" Lily nodded, pleased by the reaction. "Pa taught me whittling before." She didn't finish the thought, but she didn't need to, before grief had stolen her joy. Patrick cleared his throat, suddenly emotional. "Your mother would be proud of your skill," he said quietly. Julia gave Lily a book of poetry by Emily Dickinson, a new collection Patrick knew his daughter had been eager to read. For Patrick, she had selected a fine leather journal. "For recording your thoughts," she explained. "Or perhaps the story of the double Q for future generations." Patrick's gift to Julia was a silver pendant in the shape of a small, open book with a delicate chain. "May I?" he asked, holding it up. Julia nodded, turning so he could fasten it around her neck. His fingers brushed the soft skin at her nape, and he felt her slight shiver at his touch. When everyone else had gone to bed, the ranch hands to the bunkhouse, Lily to her room, Patrick and Julia remained by the fire, sitting close together on the worn sofa that Sarah had once roof-upholstered with such care. "This has been the most wonderful Christmas I can remember," Julia said softly, her head resting lightly against Patrick's shoulder. "For me as well," he admitted. Seeing Lily smile again, hearing her laugh, I'd nearly given up hope. Julia turned to face him. "You never truly gave up, Patrick. You kept living, kept trying, even when it must have seemed impossible." "I had help," he said, taking her hand in his. "You came to Roswell and brought something back to life in both of us." Her fingers tightened around his. "I came looking for a fresh start, but I found so much more than that." The firelight played across her features, highlighting the gentle curve of her cheek, the fullness of her lips. Patrick had been fighting his feelings for months, uncertain of whether they were appropriate, of whether Lily would accept them, of whether Julia herself returned them. But in that moment, with Christmas magic enveloping the ranch house and his daughter's laughter still echoing in his memory, Patrick Quinn took a leap of faith. "Julia," he said softly, "I've grown mighty fond of you." Her smile widened. "I've grown mighty fond of you too, Patrick Quinn." When he leaned forward to kiss her, it felt like coming home after a long, difficult journey. Her lips were soft and yielding beneath his, her hand rising to cup his cheek with tender affection. The kiss was gentle, unhurried, filled with promise rather than passion. As they drew apart, Patrick rested his forehead against hers. "I don't want to rush you or complicate your life here in Roswell." Julia laughed softly. "Life is meant to be complicated, Patrick. That's how we know we're truly living it." A sound from the doorway made them both turn. Lily stood there in her nightgown, her expression unreadable. "Lily," Patrick began, uncertain what to say, how to explain, but his daughter surprised him once again. "I just wanted some water," she said quietly. "Don't mind me." As she turned to go, Julia called after her, "Lily, wait, please." Lily paused, looking back with eyes that held so many conflicting emotions. Patrick's heart ached for her. "I would never try to replace your mother," Julia said, her voice steady but gentle. "She will always be part of you, part of this family." Lily nodded slowly. "I know that." She hesitated, then added, "She would want Pa to be happy, and you make him happy." Before either adult could respond, Lily disappeared back toward her room, leaving Patrick and Julia to exchange wondering glances. "She's quite remarkable, your daughter," Julia said finally. "She takes after her mother," Patrick replied, then smiled. "But I think she's learning a thing or two from you as well." The winter months passed in a haze of quiet happiness. Patrick and Julia's courtship progressed slowly, respectful of Lily's feelings and the close-knit community's watchful eyes. They attended church together on Sundays, took occasional rides across the ranch's winter landscape, and shared simple dinners at the Double Q or in Julia's small house in town. Lily continued to blossom. Her reading sessions at the school expanded to twice weekly, and she began to form friendships with some of the younger women in town. She smiled more easily, laughed more freely, though there were still days when melancholy would descend like the winter fog over the desert. On one such day in late February, Patrick found his daughter sitting alone on the porch, staring out at the barren landscape. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, settling beside her when she nodded. They sat in companionable silence for a while before Lily spoke. "I still miss her, Pa, every day." "So do I, sunshine. That won't ever change." "But it's different now," Lily continued thoughtfully. "Before, it hurt so much I couldn't bear it. Now, it's more like an ache I've learned to live with." Patrick put his arm around his daughter's shoulders, and she leaned into him as she hadn't done since childhood. "That's called healing, Lily. Your mother would be proud of how strong you've become." "It's because of Miss Baker, Julia," Lily admitted. "She showed me it was all right to be happy again, to live again." "She's good at that," Patrick agreed. "For both of us." Lily looked up at him. "Are you going to marry her, Pa?" The directness of the question startled Patrick, though he'd been considering that very possibility for weeks now. "Would that be all right with you if I did?" "Yes," Lily said simply. "I think it would be all right." Spring came early to New Mexico territory that year. By mid-March, the desert was beginning to bloom, patches of wildflowers creating splashes of color across the landscape. The Double Q was busy with spring calving, and Patrick found himself working from dawn to dusk alongside his ranch hands. Julia's school was thriving as well. With 22 students now enrolled, a record for Roswell, she had petitioned the town council for funds to expand the building. Patrick had attended the meeting where she presented her case with such passion and clarity that even the most tight-fisted council members were persuaded. "You were magnificent," he told her afterward as they walked arm in arm through the twilight town. "Those children are fortunate to have you as their teacher." Julia squeezed his arm affectionately. "Teaching is more than just a profession to me. It's a calling." "Like ranching is for me," Patrick nodded. "Building something that will last, something to pass on to future generations." They had reached the small bridge that crossed the creek at the edge of town. Patrick stopped, turning to face Julia in the soft evening light. He had been carrying his mother's ring in his pocket for days, waiting for the right moment. "Julia Baker," he said, taking both her hands in his, "you came to Roswell and brought life back to a house that had forgotten how to laugh. You helped my daughter find her smile again, and you helped me remember that love doesn't end with loss." Julia's eyes widened as Patrick knelt before her, drawing the simple gold band from his pocket. "I'm a simple rancher, not a man of fancy words or grand gestures. But I love you with all my heart, and I would be honored if you would consider becoming my wife." Tears spilled onto Julia's cheeks as she nodded, unable to speak for a moment. Finally, she managed, "Yes, Patrick Quinn. Yes, I will marry you." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Patrick felt a lightness in his heart he hadn't experienced in years. When Julia pulled him to his feet and into a kiss that promised a lifetime of happiness, he knew that Sarah would approve. His first love would always be part of him, but his heart had expanded to embrace this second chance at happiness. News of their engagement spread through Roswell like wildfire. Most reactions were positive congratulatory handshakes for Patrick, hugs and good wishes for Julia. Jasper Thornton was a notable exception, making his disappointment known through pointed remarks at the general store and thinly veiled criticism of hasty decisions. Patrick paid little attention to such petness. His focus was on blending his family with the woman who had brought such joy back into their lives. Julia and Lily spent long hours together planning the wedding, which they had decided would take place in early June, after the school term ended. "Nothing fancy," Julia insisted. "Just friends and family in the church and perhaps a celebration afterward at the ranch." Patrick agreed readily. Like Julia, he preferred simplicity to showiness. Their happiness required no elaborate display. The weeks leading up to the wedding passed in a blur of preparations. The entire community became involved, from the church ladies planning the refreshments to Patrick's ranch hands constructing long tables and benches for the celebration. Even Sheriff Wilkins contributed, organizing a group of townsmen to clear and level an area behind the ranch house for dancing. Lily threw herself into the preparations with surprising enthusiasm. She and Julia worked together to transform Julia's simple white dress with delicate embroidery around the collar and cuffs. In the evenings, Lily would practice playing wedding marches on the piano that had stood silent since her mother's death. "You've started playing again," Patrick observed one evening, pausing in the doorway to listen as Lily's fingers moved confidently across the keys. She nodded without stopping. "Julia asked if I would play for the wedding. I needed to practice." Patrick swallowed hard against the emotion rising in his throat. Sarah had been the musical one in the family, teaching Lily from the time she could sit upright on the piano bench. After her death, Lily had refused to touch the instrument, as if the music had died along with her mother. "It sounds beautiful, sunshine," he said softly. Lily's fingers faltered briefly, then continued with renewed determination. "She would want music at your wedding, Pa. She always said a house without music was like a body without a soul." On the morning of the wedding, the double queue was a hive of activity. Women from town bustled about the kitchen, preparing platters of food for the celebration. Men set up tables and strung paper lanterns between the cottonwood trees behind the house. Children darted everywhere, alternately helping and hindering the adults' efforts. Patrick stood on the porch, watching it all with a mixture of joy and nostalgia. His own wedding to Sarah had been a small, hurried affair at her parents' farm in Kansas, before they'd set out for the territories, with little more than a wagon of supplies and a wealth of dreams. "You look very handsome, Pa." He turned to find Lily standing in the doorway, dressed in a new blue gown that emphasized her transformation from girl to young woman. At 18, with her dark hair swept up and her mother's pearl earrings adorning her ears, she was the image of Sarah when he'd first met her. "And you look beautiful," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Just like your mother." Lily smiled, a full, genuine smile that transformed her face. "Julia helped me with my hair. She said Mother would be with us today in spirit." "She will be," Patrick agreed, offering his arm to his daughter. "Shall we go to church and meet your future stepmother?" The little white church in Roswell had never looked more festive. Wildflowers decorated every pew end, and sunlight streamed through the simple glass windows, bathing the interior in warm, golden light. Every seat was filled, with latecomers standing along the walls and at the back. As Lily took her place at the piano and began to play, Patrick stood at the altar beside Reverend Thomas, his heart pounding with anticipation. When Julia appeared in the doorway, a simple bouquet of desert flowers in her hands, a collective murmur of appreciation rippled through the congregation. She walked alone down the aisle, her eyes never leaving Patrick's face. Her dress was elegant in its simplicity, the embroidery Lily had added catching the light as she moved. But it was her expression radiant with happiness and love that took Patrick's breath away. The ceremony itself was brief, but heartfelt. They exchanged traditional vows, promising to love and cherish one another through all of life's joys and sorrows. When Reverend Thomas pronounced them husband and wife, Patrick kissed his bride with reverent tenderness, aware of the gift he'd been given a second chance at love, a new beginning for his family. The celebration at the double queue lasted well into the evening. Lanterns glowed in the gathering darkness as couples danced to music provided by a small band from town. Children played games of tag between the tables, their laughter mingling with the adults' conversation and the occasional whinny of horses from the nearby corral. Patrick and Julia moved among their guests, accepting congratulations and well wishes. When they finally had a moment alone, Patrick pulled his new wife close for a lingering kiss. "Happy, Mrs. Quinn?" he asked, smiling down at her. Julia's eyes sparkled in the lantern light. "Happier than I ever imagined possible. And you, Mr. Quinn?" "Complete," he answered simply. "For the first time in years, I feel complete." They were interrupted by Lily, who approached with a shy smile. "May I borrow my new stepmother for a moment, Pa?" Patrick released Julia with a nod, watching curiously as the two women he loved most in the world walked a short distance away, deep in private conversation. He couldn't hear their words, but he saw Lily press something into Julia's hand, saw Julia's expression soften with emotion before she embraced his daughter tightly. When they returned, both had tears in their eyes, though they were smiling through them. "What was that about?" Patrick asked gently. Julia opened her hand to reveal a delicate silver locket, Sarah's locket, which Lily had kept in her dresser drawer since her mother's death. "Lily wanted me to have this," Julia explained, her voice thick with emotion, "as a symbol that I'm truly part of the family now." Patrick looked at his daughter in wonder. "Are you sure, Lily? That was your mother's most treasured possession." Lily nodded, her eyes clear and certain. Mother would want it this way, Pa. She'd want us to be happy, to be a family again. As the three of them stood together under the star-filled New Mexico sky, Patrick Quinn knew that his daughter had finally found her way back to joy, and so had he. The journey had been long and often painful, but with Julia's help, laughter and hope had returned to the Double Q at last. In the years that followed, the ranch prospered under Patrick and Julia's joint stewardship. They welcomed a son the following spring, a sturdy, dark-haired boy they named Thomas after Julia's father. 2 years later, a daughter joined the family, with her mother's honey blonde curls and sunny disposition. Lily remained at the ranch, becoming Julia's full partner in managing the household and helping to raise her half-siblings. Her reading sessions at the school evolved into a formal position as Julia's assistant teacher, a role that brought her great fulfillment. In time, she would meet a young doctor who came to establish Roswell's first proper medical practice, a man whose quiet strength and compassion would help her open her heart to love once more. The Double Q became known throughout the territory, not just for its fine cattle and horses, but for the warmth and hospitality of the family who called it home. Laughter echoed through rooms that had once been shadowed by grief, and the Quinn family story continued enriched rather than diminished by the memories of those who had gone before. And on quiet evenings, when the children were asleep and the day's work was done, Patrick and Julia would sit together on the porch, watching the desert sunset paint the sky in hues of gold and crimson. In those peaceful moments, they would sometimes speak of the unexpected paths that had led them to each other, of the healing power of love, and of the remarkable young woman whose journey back to joy had made their own happiness possible. "We're blessed," Patrick would often say, his arm around his wife's shoulders as they gazed out at the land they both loved, and Julia, leaning into his embrace, would simply nod and reply, "Yes, my love. In every way that matters, we truly are."